the film at the 48-hour project in Edinburgh won an honourable mention for production values, which was good. That had been part of our kind of aim, was to make sure that we created something really high quality. And then it was one of a few films which were screened at the LA 3D Film Festival and got a Director's Choice Award, which was really nice. It also went on to screen, I think it's had about 12 or 13 screenings around the world: Belgium, Czech Republic, East Korea, Britain, America, and has had over 120,000 views on YouTube in 3D. Because for those of you who don't know, YouTube have a 3D engine built into it, where if you set the file up correctly, it will be viewable in 3D and on a wide range of kind of monitors, from something like that through to anaglyph versions. Again, going back to the kind of projection thing. So the key learnings though: play it safe, because there's really not much time for doing stuff in post. There's one shot in that, which maybe some of you noticed, it was a bit extreme, and that actually, there was actually no real way to easily fix it. Probably would have been a reshoot. It was only one shot though, so in the scheme of things I wasn't too concerned. We also, because it was horror and we were playing with it, we were happy to let stuff stick out the screen, as you would have seen in a couple of shots. We were going for those really like over the top, out the screen moments. But the majority of the film you would have seen was actually kept within the screen. Everything was kept in positive parallax, they call it. Keep it short. That time we wrote a 5-page script, filmed it. We actually, everything finished on time, if not early, and we got to drop off the film. We managed to drop off the film at 6 o'clock. So we were an hour and a half before our actual close point, which was really good. Sticking to the one location was good. We wouldn't have really been able to move that number of people around, so sticking to that one location. And for me, the woods worked pretty well. It was kind of quite visually interesting. There was all sorts of stuff going on. What you kind of probably miss seeing on such a small screen, and especially because you're quite far away from it, is on a big screen, it's actually the 3D stronger, which we'll get to when we're talking about technology and how it works. So yeah, on a big screen, it was actually 3D was very strong, and it works really well in when you're using Polaris glasses, but anaglyph glasses, slight issue. So yeah, sticking to one visually interesting location, split the files as we go. As I said, with that, the one thing we did concern us that actually pushed things later than we hoped it would be was splitting files, because we were still trying to split the files while we were ready to edit it. So when we've done it again, we've actually shot for maybe an hour or an hour and a half, and then given the editor the files to start splitting it, so that we can kind of stay ahead of the game. Or use an editing application that doesn't require those files, but I've yet to find one that doesn't crash, so it's not really a viable option. Handheld shooting is really good. Having a tripod is obviously great, but we usually shoot on a very basic handheld rig like this, which gives you good stability and means you can move the camera really, really efficiently and really quickly. When you're trying to kind of work as cinematographer as well, you're kind of always trying to look at interesting shots, and if you can't look through the lens because you can't move it around very quickly, it's kind of frustrating. One of the things with 3D though is that kind of shaky camera is really not good. And on a big screen it can be horrendous. It actually does create nausea, because it's your brain is trying to do too much for it to be scrambling about like that. So really, really solid handheld shots like this, gives us a very, very smooth shot. And actually, the majority of that film was shot on this. Hopefully you wouldn't have noticed. There was very little kind of sort of shakiness about it. In fact, someone on one of the forums said, "Great Steadicam work." It's nuts. That's a 40 quid Steadicam as opposed to as opposed to very expensive bits of kit. Stay there. And finally, I wouldn't project again in anaglyph. Projecting in red and blue was horrendous. It really does. It just degenerates the image so much. There's so much, like, the stuff there was only one shot where I think there was a bit of ghosting when you're looking at through proper polarized glasses. There was so many shots that were just ugly in red and blue. So generally I wouldn't actually screen again in anaglyph. The following two films that we did, which we shot in 3D, edited and put online in 3D and submitted to 3D film festivals for 40-hour film project, we only screened it in 2D. We wouldn't do it in anaglyph again, and there was no way to screen it in 3D. So if we couldn't maintain the quality of what we wanted to show, then we thought we would fall back and rather show it in 2D as opposed to show a bad version in 3D. And that's it for that bit. So was there any questions? Yeah. Thank
you. You talked about scripts in After Effects. Could you detail the part of the editing part? You edit in Premiere, and then what did you do in After Effects?
Well, I can do better than that, because in the next part I'm actually going to demonstrate it. So I'll show you what we do. But to give you a quick overview, there's a little trick, effectively, to it. So you split the files into a left and a right eye. Okay? You do all your edits on the left eye. Now, again, you'll get 3D purists are going to really argue that actually when you're editing for 3D, you have to edit in 3D. I think you've got to be careful and watch it in 3D and then maybe make tweaks to it, but I don't believe you have to edit in 3D. The reason that they say that is actually fast cutting doesn't work well. Fast cutting in 3D means if you're chopping like that, your brain hasn't got the time to process the visual information to actually perceive the depth. What actually some of the kind of Hollywood stereographers have suggested is if you want to do fast cuts, so you're doing a 3D film but you want to do fast cuts, just do those in 2D, just push everything slightly back into the screen so your brain can't even tell the difference because it's so fast. The other thing is that the general consensus is that when you're editing for 3D, because your brain is doing that bit more work to make sense of it, that you actually edit a bit slower because it feels faster. And certainly that seems to be the kind of consensus view, is that, yeah, you edit slightly slower because your brain feels that it's faster. So if you watch a 3D film that feels fast, if you watch it in 2D, it probably won't feel quite the same. Yeah?
How do you feel about fade transitions in 3D?
It's really difficult to get them right. It is really, really difficult. There is a way to do it.
Does graphic matching help, or?
Essentially what you have to do is depth matching.
Oh.
So where your eyes are concentrated, which is usually, in 3D, is usually on the screen plane. Yeah? You've got those shots where things are sticking out and you're focused on that. You've got those things where things are maybe pushed deep in and you're focused on that. Generally, it's the screen plane where your actual focus is, because that's your convergence point. What you do is, if you're going to do the crossfade between the two shots, if you keep both of them pretty much on the same level, you can actually get away with it. It's if you're doing a cross convergence from one angle to another, from one depth to another, what you have to do is you have to do a kind of depth kind of, what's the term? It's like a depth fade as well. So if you've got something starting inside the screen, what you do over the course of maybe 6 frames is you actually depth grade that to move everything forward while you're doing the one that you're fading into. You're probably starting here and bringing it out so that when they cross over, there's a kind of point where they're roughly again on that same Z depth. So a lot of it is about that kind of Z depth matching. So it can be done. I'm not really convinced of it. It's just straight cutting, unless there's a specific reason you need to do it. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
It's more general observations. So over the last few years, we had a lot of 3Ds being pushed, for like 3D TVs and I've always been a bit tight, so I don't really agree with paying more to cinema to just go watching in 3D.
Totally agree with you.
But so with your knowledge and expertise, I've seen some really good things, I've seen some not so good things. What would be the good reference from a 3D filmmaker in terms of what work's being produced around that is showing, you know, what you can actually do in the best possible way?
Do you mean in terms of what are good examples?
Yeah, in terms of like movies or, like for instance, at some point they were showing Formula One in 3D.
Yeah,
that
it's...
didn't really...
Well, there's a few things. First, home use. I mean, pretty much the industry has agreed that home 3D is dead. In terms of broadcast, certainly, it's just not happening. Sky can keep doing 3D, but A, they're not producing enough content, and B, there's an issue for people in the home using glasses. Now, we actually, when I heard this was about interactive storytelling, it reminded me of like years back in my more day job in marketing. I was involved in looking at interactive TV, you know, at very early stages. You know, I'm trying to think what year it was. It was probably still in the 90s. It was very, very early on interactive TV stuff, which was the kind of typical red button thing. And what we actually, and there was this, I was part of a kind of a global task force looking at how our group of marketing and ad agencies could kind of get into this market and use it. And we did a few interesting experiments. Well, this is the best thing ever. But there was a problem because TV was, maybe still is, a communal viewing experience. It's not just a solo viewing experience. And like the argument over who's got the remote control, it really frustrated people when people were interacting with it. Because if you were, say your family, when my kids were young, the four of us would be sitting there watching something. If someone then started taking control of it, it was irritating. So what we found was interactive TV didn't work because you don't want one person controlling it and changing what's going on. And it was really frustrating. Now I think there's a similarity with 3D because you've got this kind of social environment. As soon as you put those glasses on, it darkens your vision. I can't quite explain it. You're less connected to the person next to you. Now it's even worse because typically nowadays you're multitasking when you're watching TV. If you try and look at your phone or your tablet with the glasses on, you can't actually see it clearly because they have the resolution of everything. So you're looking at a phone and it's blurred. So 3D TV in the home is pretty much dead unless they get good quality stereoscopic, i.e. glasses-free sets. That's kind of, I mean, that's my view, and I think again that's pretty much a general consensus. There's all the, you know, real intense 3D fanatics are blaming everything on the lack of content. I think that's partly it, but I think it's wrong. It's the wrong medium. Wearing glasses to watch TV just isn't working. When you go to a cinema, you're sitting in a darkened room just to watch a movie. You want everything quiet, you want everything blacked out, you don't need other people, you're not multitasking. You know, so I think it's a different experience. In terms of what works, I think anything can be made to work, but fast sports, again, because it's fast, they had to, like when they were showing football, I think they still do, they had to completely change how they show it, which I think normal football fans kind of weren't that keen on because they had to change their shots. Where they would normally maybe use a much closer shot, they were kind of using wider shots, and then you get kind of effects, which I'll talk about again later on, of this kind of weird miniaturization effect, whereby you're looking at players and instead of your brain comprehending that they're a normal sized player, it kind of looks like everything's miniaturized. You know, it's a really common effect in 3D. So, yeah, I think 3D for home use leaves a bit to be desired.
So all those glasses-free projection, it is possible?
Glasses 3 is possible. I've got a couple of little test units here to show you. I've got a Glasses 3 Android tablet, which is pretty good.
It's very expensive.
No, it's about £150.
Oh.
And I've got a really cheap media player, which isn't quite so good, but it was like £60 or something. But it kind of shows you where Glasses 3 is, and that's the cheap end of the market. The high end of the market, at the moment is probably only being targeted at marketing and advertising. So for trade shows, because you walk past something three-dimensional, kind of moving on a screen, just naturally captures your eye more than a 2D screen does. So there's some pretty good sets. The technology for those is kind of a bit more complex though, because for Glasses 3, for stereoscopic with kind of using glasses and lenses that are simple, you only need the 2 views. For good auto-stereoscopic screens, you need a minimum of 8 views. But there is technology, there's algorithms developed which will take your stereoscopic pair and generate the other views, and does it effectively. It's very difficult. You'll know about typical TV sets or projection systems that claim to convert 2D to 3D. They're very, very poor. I mean, they are pretty much pointless. But that's because it's just it's trying to guess information from here, and it usually quite often relies on brightness information. So if something is bright, it tends to think that it's closer. So you get this weird effect where something bright in the background, the sun, will be pushed to the front. You know, it just can't calculate it. But whereas if you've got a stereoscopic pair, it can accurately measure where things are, and it really comes down to processing power. So as processing power's got better, and algorithms have developed, they've now got algorithms which they're building into boxes that will analyze a stereoscopic feed and generate those alternative views. For the best quality though, it's pre-created, so they'll take the stereo pair, do analysis on it, work on it just like you do other post-production, and generate the other views, so that when you see the demos that the manufacturers show, you'll see phenomenal stuff. But that's obviously been really created for it. But it will show that they're good screens. But yeah, I'll pass these around in a little while, like you said.
Do you think they just approached the wrong technology too early, or?
Probably, yeah. I mean, the way they brought the technology out, they first also brought shutter glasses, which were expensive, heavy, uncomfortable, required batteries. Technically, in theory, it gives a better image because it gives a full HD image to each eye, but it was just cumbersome. Whereas, you know, these glasses are cheap and cheerful, and you know, it doesn't matter. Whereas, the ones with our first 3D set, glasses were 80 or 90 quid a pair. You know, so for 4 of us, it's like as much as the set nearly. You know, so it just wasn't really practical. But then LG and others, well, in fact, which is a really cheapy set, they work on these polarized glasses, which is nice and easy to work with. My monitors, and in fact, this screen, if anyone wants to see it at some point, this laptop has actually got a screen that works with these glasses. And I've got monitors, LG monitors, that work on when I'm working in After Effects and stuff that just use these. It's great because you're just working natively in 3D and stereoscopic. Yes?
I was just curious, in your opinion, what do you think is a film that's come out in cinema in the past like 2-3 years that you think is an exemplary use of 3D, and from a technical standpoint, why?
I thought Gravity. I think that Gravity is the most amazing 3D film. And why? Oh, it was perfect. It was technically perfect. There was just no issues with it. And it's strange, I always argue that you've got to have the best script and start with the best script, and I wouldn't say that Gravity was the best script. It was fairly basic story. It was nice and concise, so that was really good. But why Gravity worked was, for some reason, it actually was like experiencing being in space, and I very seldom see a film that gives me an experience. So, you know, some people have argued, oh well, it's kind of like a ride, but it's not. It's just so involving. And also, I really liked what they did with jumping from the hugeness of space to being inside a kind of capsule. So you were, you know, using vast depths to like then going really confined and they kind of go in between them. Again, the editing and the camera work, although it's obviously, or it's effectively, none of it was actually filmed in 3D. Even the characters, there was no 3D cameras used, it was all virtual. So the characters themselves, although you'll see them and they've got volume, that was all done in post-conversion. The using like long, slow shots actually worked brilliantly as well, because you were just constantly on the move. There was no cutting, so it was, 3D-wise, that just was astounding. It was astounding use of 3D.
Do you think there's also had something to do with the lack of sort of objects on the peripheral of a lot of the shots? There's no objects to be cut off by the screen.
Yeah, well, I mean that's one of the things that we'll talk about later as well, because that's actually one of the biggest technical problems that you have is Windows violations, whereby you have these things getting cut off at the side, cause what's called retinal rivalry, where you get one eye seeing something and another eye not, and it really bugs you. But actually, any good quality 3D film, you shouldn't have that. You shouldn't be aware of anything like that. I think for me it was Gravity Works, astounding. A lot of filmmakers or stereographers particularly pick on or particularly talk about How to Train Your Dragon. Now the guy who was a stereographer on that, whose book I brought, is, if you want to read further, Captain Phil McNally's called Captain 3D. This is the book to read. This is the Bible. There's a lot of books out there nowadays, but this is the one to read. He worked for DreamWorks, and he worked on How to Train Your Dragon, and the stereographers certainly love it. They analyze every shot, and again, once I talk about how Hollywood works with 3D and how seriously they take it, but Phil McNally, amongst several others, is seen as the kind of the people in the know, the people at the cutting edge. Yeah. Anything else?
In Italy, you got first a huge boom, now everything must be 3D. Now only the afternoon shows
Right.
are in 3D. If you wish to go to a film, How to Train Your Dragon 2, you must go in the afternoon.
In the afternoon?
Yeah. Have you some numbers or something, why this is happening?
I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting one. I don't know about that. I actually know some students in Italy who did a really good 3D music video. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Did some phenomenal stuff. They shared all this stuff with me, and it was great. Really beautiful, beautiful shots they got. Anyway, sorry, to answer your question, I don't have numbers. I can tell you, statistically, the 3D version of films versus the 2D version, I think the average now is currently running at somewhere between 30 and 40% of the income generated comes off the 3D version. So, I mean, obviously Hollywood's just a business, so they're looking at it, if they spend 10% more for a 30% return, they're happy, so they'll do it. As to why we afternoon shows, well, one of the things is obviously a lot of the 3D films are kids' films. So the animated films are really easy to make in 3D because you don't have real cameras. Virtual cameras are an absolute dream. You can do anything in the virtual world. So the real world, you've got all these problems. In the virtual world, you can move backgrounds to where you want them. You can move everything around. You can fake things. You can do something on one layer and have more 3D, and background layer have less 3D, and then composite them together and have a perfect shot. Whereas in reality, it's just not as practical. So maybe it's because a lot of youth cinema is kind of is 3D. I kind of get frustrated because having my kids grown up now, I spend years and years having to go to kids films. But after so many years of going to kids films, I've had enough of them. And of course, because I'm interested in 3D, I still now have to watch every kids film to see how well they've done it or how badly they've done it.
So what would you
say the impact is on the writing of the script than if you're writing for
And-
page?
If you're writing for 3D, again, we'll talk a wee bit about that later. For me, it's kind of interesting I think of it more, now there's different approaches to this. I think of it more probably like color grading or using sound. It's more a subtle thing, as in how can you enhance what the character's feeling. And I'd probably prefer to answer the question after we've kind of spoken about the other stuff and showed another film where I think I've got good examples. And in fact, I specifically added a bit to my presentation because the kind of technical stuff in that, it's kind of straightforward. It's the same presentation, but I thought to talk about storytelling, which is actually something I'm really interested in 3D. I added a bit to the presentation where we can have a good talk about it and show a couple of films that have used it differently. And maybe that would be a good point to answer that.